Alberta Primetime with Michael Higgins.
Welcome to Alberta Primetime. Ahead tonight, our politics panel on a petition launched by a Calgarian to expel the U.S. ambassador. But first, urgent trade talks.
Minister, how close are we to a deal?
Bonjour. Hello. You know we're not going to discuss those things.
Canadian trade delegates remaining mum following the latest meeting in Washington, D.C. with U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer. And with the August 19th deadline and the threat of 50% tariffs looming large, federal Conservatives are out with a letter to the Prime Minister calling on the Carney government to show some backbone, saying Ottawa has given in to several of the U.S. president's demands in the last year. Signing that letter, along with party leader Pierre Poilievre, was the Shadow Minister for Canada-U.S. Relations, Shuvaloy Majumdar, and he's also the MP for Calgary Heritage. He joins us now. Mr. Majumdar, good to meet you, sir. Welcome to Alberta Primetime.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Michael.
All right, so the Canadian team, as we heard there in the clip, remaining tight-lipped for now, but word is the two sides aim to put a trade deal in front of the U.S. president early next week. What does that say to you about progress in these negotiations?
You know, we've had a year and a half of the Prime Minister approaching this entire negotiation with a wait-and-see approach. He failed to make the big decisions on our commodities, our manufacturing base, and other things that would have been positive incentives to negotiate for North America, for Canada. Only in the 11th hour, after having provided concession after concession after concession, he's now negotiating terms with Washington on terms that he did not define. Remember, these negotiations were imposed on Canada through these unjustified tariffs by Washington, and have brought the Prime Minister to the table. This is after he spent several months pursuing a wait-and-see approach, turning to Beijing, organizing middle powers, not making the big decisions to unleash domestic strength. It's sad to see that we're negotiating this from a position of weakness. And so we're calling on the Prime Minister to make the big decisions that Canada needs, to use these positive incentives, for example, strategic reserve for energy and critical minerals, an Auto Pack 2.0, a defense industrial base that's reanimated, all the big things that should have been happening. And we'll see what these negotiations result in. I know there's a lot of Canadians feeling a lot of anxiety right now.
Well, now the message in your letter to the PM was that Canada should be negotiating from a position of strength, stop the concessions, and show some backbone. To what degree does that reflect an elbows up moment for your party?
Well, look, our party has been consistent about these positions for several months. Pierre Poilievre won the consensus in this country on the direction that we needed to take when it came to unleashing our resources and ending anti-development legislation on shovel-ready projects within 6 months, on things like a renewed manufacturing base with Auto Pack 2.0, on being able to establish a strategic energy and minerals reserves, which is we're the only G7 country that doesn't have one, with scalable capacity to stabilize markets for tariff-free access. Like, all of these things were things that Conservatives have been proposing, a backbone for our country, the kind of strength that we need all along. The Prime Minister's intransigence with that, dispensing with this as central, but instead turning to Beijing, turning to organized middle powers and other countries, rather than focusing on the 75% of trade that Canada needs to focus on with the United States and how that relationship would be managed. He pursued wait and see. That came out as a concession when he went to New York to say that Canada is going to build its strength to make America great again. That was a real turning point for him, because it was an admission that everything he had done prior to that was essentially putting Canada in a position of weakness.
To expand those U.S. trade opportunities, could that not, though, need concessions on the Canadian part?
I think a lot of big decisions need to be taken for Canada, whether it's things like repealing the Netflix tax, which was a decision Canada needed to make, whether it was thickening our border, which is a decision Canada needed to make, which it was to unleash our resources or critical minerals, which are decisions Canada still has to take. These are all decisions that Canada needs to make and should be woven into a comprehensive negotiation for Washington and for the world. That's something that the Prime Minister has failed to accomplish. And that's why we we don't want to see any more concessions. The country has offered up so much to Washington, expecting things back in good faith, and has received nothing to show for it. And so we need the government to stand for the Canadian worker, particularly for those who are tariff affected in aluminum, in steel, in lumber, and in various kind of manufacturing industries that have been impacted so hard. So I think it's important that Canada have a government that has a self-respect to fight for our own people and our own sovereignty.
Where relations are concerned, what's the position of your party on that element we teed off at the top of the program, the petition to be tabled in the House calling for U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra to be declared persona non grata? The government request his removal. Where does that register on your radar?
Look, Canadians have had to deal with Republicans and Democrats across generations in terms of our relationship with the United States. Our geography is North America, which it defines our national and economic security. We should be able to have a negotiation with different counterparties, no matter how tough it gets. And so I think that while I understand the sentiment that many Canadians have about this administration and how President Trump has been using Canadians as a punching bag, none of us stand for that. It's important for us to stay focused on the Canadian worker and doing the best possible diplomacy we can to accomplish the certainty that they deserve.
You have a background in foreign policy prior to being elected to Parliament. If it is that the two sides are unable to land a deal by that Trump-imposed deadline a week from today, what should Canadians then expect of the Carney government?
It's a fair question, and listen, having been an advisor to Prime Minister Harper and others, I can tell you that trade negotiations are indeed complex. The Prime Minister has the support of Conservatives to make these big decisions, to grow the backbone he needs, and to deliver a good deal for the country. He has our sympathy as well in dealing with a tough and unpredictable negotiator. And so it's probably better for me to wait to see exactly what this negotiation produces, whether it's a deal or not a deal, to review the facts of what has been delivered, and then to come back and offer views at that point.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for time. I appreciate your time this evening, Mr. Majumdar. Thank you kindly.
Thanks, Michael.
Shivalai Majumdar, MP for Calgary Heritage and the Conservatives' Shadow Minister for Canada-U.S. Relations. From the latest developments on negotiations to land a new trade deal with the Trump administration to the petition calling for the U.S. ambassador to be expelled. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, former MLA Karen McPherson and Dwayne Bratt, political scientist at Mount Royal University. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with the status of Canada-U.S. trade talks that appear to be gaining traction. This is Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc and Chief Negotiator Janice Charette in Washington, emerging Tuesday from a meeting with U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer. CTV News has learned the two sides aim to have a layout of a trade deal in front of President Trump before next Wednesday. That's when new 50% U.S. tariffs on a wide range of Canadian goods are to take effect. Karen, I'll start with you. What do you make of the rush to make a deal, and where Canada may actually stand here?
Those are enormous tariffs, 50% tariffs on a number of sectors. That would be extremely problematic. Trump is looking for a win. He's facing midterm elections in November, and he's not doing so great in the polls. And a lot of the people that he's backed, that he's given his endorsement to, are not succeeding in their primaries. So he really wants a win. If Canada is able to concede on some things that won't be as impactful as others, it is possible that there is an upside to this negotiation, that there will be success. You're not going to make 100% of people happy, but at least hopefully Canada can minimize the impact on Canadian sectors, on the Canadian economy, and Trump can come out looking a little bit better.
Dwayne, if there is, in fact, a deal to put in front of Donald Trump next week, what weight do you actually see it carrying?
Well, there's a couple things here. One is we're dealing with multiple trade aspects. So we have this 50% tariff, which sounds like a lot, but it's on less than 5% of our total trade with the United States. Then we've got the renegotiations of CUSMA that were supposed to have been done by July 1st. And obviously that deadline was missed. And then finally, we've got the big tariffs that have been hit against forestry, autos, steel, and aluminum. So what do you mean by a deal? Is it a comprehensive deal that deals with all of that material? Or is it just something narrow dealing with this 50%? It's really difficult. And then finally, how much faith can you put on the signature of the president on a trade deal? I put close to zero, because other countries, after Liberation Day in the spring of 2025, when Trump put global tariffs on, raced to make a deal, and within days, those deals collapsed, because a comprehensive trade agreement is thousands of pages long. The deal he made with Britain was 2 pages. So what sort of deal could you make with Trump? And that's a challenge that Mark Carney is facing.
Karen, we heard from Shivaloy Majumdar off the top, the Calgary MP, who's also Shadow Minister for Canada-U.S. relations. What's your takeaway from the Conservatives' letter to the Prime Minister to show some backbone?
That's their role, is to hold the government to account. It is pretty much whatever they want to say, because the government isn't very forthcoming. They're in negotiations. They're not able to say, these are all the issues that are on the table. This is what we're willing to concede on. This is what we're not willing to concede on. So, of course, the Conservatives are going to take advantage of that open palette to be able to paint whatever kind of picture they want to. And that's what they've done. They want to come across as strong. They want to come across as immovable, committed to workers, committed to the economy. And this lack of information, just by the very nature of the negotiation, is really an opportunity for them.
Dwayne, how much of a path do you see the Conservatives offering when it comes to navigating successful negotiations? And is there an opportunity here to gain some traction for the party at a time when a boost in the polls would come in handy?
Yeah, there is some possibilities. Shiv Majumdar is no fool. He's got experience in foreign policy, both working for Stephen Harper and for John Baird, and the work that he did with Baird after the Conservatives lost office. And that experience and knowledge came in, I think, in the later half of his answer, which is basically, we're relying on leaks. We don't know what the agreement looks like. It's tough to make a comment on those agreements. The first part of his answer was, you're dealing with the role of an opposition, which is to oppose. So they're opposed to the removal of the digital sales tax, a tax, by the way, that Conservatives opposed and wanted removed. They're upset, I think, with some legitimacy about some of the carve-outs around the Gordie Howe Bridge. But the follow-up to that would be, should Carney not have made a deal and stranded a multi-billion-dollar asset? And so when they're talking about no concessions, they're also, this is the party that said there should be no retaliation. That energy, you'll notice the word energy never came up, about an energy export tax or a potash tax. And so the Conservatives have to be an opponent, and there is a lot to oppose Carney on, but you have to be wary of seeming to blame Carney for the problem with Canada-U.S. relations, when in my view, and the view of the vast majority of Canadians, it's Donald Trump.
Karen, what do you see hinging on that August 19th deadline? If a deal isn't landed, where would that leave the Canada-U.S. dynamic?
Well, it's going to be tenuous, and Trump continues to be paying attention to a number of different things, not the least of which is the war in Iran, which, you know, he created himself. So I don't know. As Dwayne said, it's not a huge amount of overall industry that's affected, but those industries are going to feel a lot of pain if those tariffs come into effect within the next however many weeks. I don't know. It's hard to say. Hopefully, it'll capture Trump's attention long enough to be resolved so that we don't continuously have this uncertainty, because that's not very good for investment confidence. But it's hard to tell. Trump, will change his mind on a dime, and everyone expects that.
Okay, last 20 seconds to you, Dwayne. Does Trump take the win and latch on to a deal?
My guess is there will be a delay, and it could be anywhere from 30 to 90 days. And Trump will claim they're very close to getting exactly what he wants, but they need more time, and he's just going to push the can down the road again.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break, but when we come back, a petition to boot the U.S. ambassador out of Canada. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. A petition launched by a Calgary resident is set to be presented in the House of Commons this fall, and it's generating its share of headlines this week. And that is because it's calling for U.S. President Donald Trump's representative in Ottawa to be kicked out of the country. The petition says Pete Hoekstra should be declared persona non grata and that the Canadian government request his removal as U.S. ambassador to Canada. It accuses Hoekstra of making statements that undermine the Canada-U.S. diplomatic relationship and that he's normalized the Trump administration's threats to annex Canada. Dwayne, how much of an argument is there to be made to giving the U.S. ambassador the boot?
Zero. But I think it reflects the anger that Canadians have towards the United States. If you read the petition, what they're claiming is that Hoekstra is representing Donald Trump. That's his job. And he's doing it, I think, quite effectively. And so he's a proxy. Canadians aren't necessarily mad at Hoekstra, although they may be. It's more at Trump. And Hoekstra is Trump's representative in Canada. The vast majority of Canadians could not name a previous American ambassador or any ambassador. I think Hoekstra, it shows some of his effectiveness. Do I like what he's doing? Absolutely not. But to say that he is offside from the United States, if we were to expel Hoekstra for his views, we might as well sever relations with the United States.
Karen, what do you make of the fact this online petition has something on the order of 30,000 signatures and the fact that it originates with a resident here in our province?
I think it speaks to the frustration a lot of people are feeling. They feel like they don't have a voice politically. This is a proxy for that. This is a way for them to be able to say, hey, I don't like this. I don't like what's happening, especially in Alberta. So we have, the provocation from Trump saying, 51st state. And we also have a separation question coming up in October. These things are really anxiety producing for people. So this is one way that people feel like they have an outlet. It's not a very effective way. While it may garner a number of signatures, I've heard a number as high as 54,000 this morning, it's not going to make any kind of political change. Nothing has happened that would require Hoekstra to be expelled from the country. And as Dwayne was saying, it would be really counterproductive. It wouldn't be helpful. What it does do is give Carney the opportunity to say to Trump, this is what's happening. I'm not going to kick your guy out. We're very committed to our relationship, our diplomatic relationship, and Pete is welcome here.
Okay, Dwayne, one more quick one on this. In making headlines, how does this petition play at a time when the two countries are engaged in these high-pressure trade negotiations? How about this? How likely is it to ruffle feathers in the Oval Office the way Ontario's Ronald Reagan messaging did?
Well, this is public sentiment, This is not coming from the government of Canada or even a provincial government. And I think we need to separate those. And so just to take an additional leap, the Americans are really angry about BC and Ontario pulling American liquor off the shelves. I think if that liquor went back on the shelves in BC and Ontario, it wouldn't make that much of a difference. I think Canadians would continue to boycott that. And I think that illustrates just how tense the relationship is right now, in the middle not just of the renegotiation around CUSMA, but the looming threat of a 50% tariff by next week.
All right. For us, one more topic. That is a group of BC First Nations calling for a halt to advancement of a new West Coast pipeline in a letter to both the Prime Minister and Premier Danielle Smith. The Union of British Columbia Indian Chiefs says expanding the oil industry will accelerate climate change and disasters. The group also opposing the project, saying the government has not consulted and cooperated with First Nations in good faith. Last week, Ottawa gave the proposed project a national interest designation, which would allow government to fast-track the pipeline, skirt some environmental laws. Karen, what does this say about the degree of opposition this proposed pipeline project could yet face from the BC side of the border?
Oh, I think there's a number of obstacles along the way. I would expect at some point we're going to see a question go to the Supreme Court of Canada to say, is this a legitimate project? Carney has a real tightrope to try and walk. Again, taking a look at the claims of becoming the 51st state. There's the separation question in Alberta. He's trying to keep all of the premiers happy. Eby hasn't been happy, and now Eby's facing a provincial crisis with the forest fires. There's just so much going on, and I think it was really timely of the Chiefs to bring forward their letter at the time that they did, for all of those reasons, is to garner attention. They feel like they've been left out of the process. They're hoping to gain a voice, and this is how they've gone about it.
Dwayne, how easy will it be for either the Alberta or federal governments to let something like this letter pass and plow forward with the plan to build that pipeline?
Well, the letter reflects some political anger, but it's not part of the duty to consult. It's not part of the policy process. That still is going ahead, and it's around the route. And bear in mind, the route that is going to be done through southern BC into Burnaby replicates what already happened with the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the duty to consult there. It raises a really interesting question about what the regulatory process is supposed to be. Is it about the pipeline and the pipeline route? Or do you take into effect that if you build that pipeline, there'll be increased production, which contributes to climate change? If that is the case, do we look at a road expansion through the lens of climate change as well? Do we look at the removal of bike lanes through the lens of climate, or do we look at it from a project specific? So it raises some interesting policy questions that don't come out in this letter. The duty to consult is still going to go ahead, and Indigenous groups that are not along the pipeline route aren't going to have much say.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Now, here are a few responses to a recent story posted by CTV News, and it's about Canadian and American trade officials aiming to get a deal done before Donald Trump's August 19th tariff deadline. Kelwin starts us off with, so we couldn't get a deal in a year and a half, and now suddenly we can get one within a few weeks. I'm sure this will be a doozy. Roger has a submission to Canada's suggestion box writing, take your time and don't accept any deal. MSU Spartan Warren's comments. Any agreement by the U.S. Trump administration can't be trusted anyway. Mike says it's time for Canada to fast-track building up our ports. And, according to Shag, this is all so tiresome. Have your say. Email us anytime at comments@albertaprimetime.com. Coming up tomorrow, while many marked National Peacekeepers Day last weekend, some believe Canada's overseas commitment is being wound down. We will hear from the former ambassador to the UN, Bob Ray, on Thursday. Until then, have a great evening, everyone, from all of us at Alberta Primetime. Thank you for watching, and join us again next time.